Welcome, everybody. I'm Dan Commons. I'll be kind of semi-moderating part of this. On the panel, I've got Rob Adder, who is from our security operations area within the department level. And at the end there is Special Agent Tom Harper from our OIG office. So let me do some administrative stuff, primarily to keep me on track. I was told to smile. Don't expect these guys to smile necessarily, but I'll smile for you. We'll talk a little bit about who we are here in just a minute. For questions, once we get through a presentation portion, we're going to want questions. So take that as your opportunity. Please go to the mics. This is being recorded for other folks to be able to, that were unable to come to the conference, to be able to listen to what we have to say. You will get an evaluation emailed to you after the conference. And at the end, if we have some time left over and you just want to come up and ask us individual questions, that's more acceptable. Obviously, if you have questions for me, you see me anywhere in the next 3 days. I'll be here through Thursday evening. By all means, go ahead and ask those questions. So without further ado, we'll get started. I'll introduce myself, and then I'll have the gentleman introduce himself. So again, I'm Dan Commons. I am the Federal Student Aid Chief Information Security Officer. School cybersecurity comes underneath my umbrella. I am supported by these gentlemen. Rob, from a department perspective, we work very closely, and then Agent Harper from the OIG side of the house that we also work very, very closely with as well. So my primary interest is school data, what we provide to you under Title IV information, and then making sure that we protect that appropriately as we go forward. And we'll get into a number of those issues. Rob? You can speak right there. You got a mic.
Good afternoon. So I'm Rob Ader. So as Dan said, I'm the department's cyber operations lead. Most notably, what kind of falls in my purview is the Department Security Operations Center. So we take lead on a lot of incident activities that are reported to the department. However, the primary focus of what the department SOC looks at is more so from the education's enterprise. However, we will, in close coordination with Dan and his team, and then Tom and his folks, get involved in other activities that do not directly interfere with any of the department's education, as we are just as on the hook as any of these gentlemen for the department's information.
Thank you. Special Agent Harper.
Are we going to go through the slides?
We will after this.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
Hi, my name's Tom Harper. I'm the Special Agent in charge of our Technology Crimes Division in OIG. When we get a little further down in the slides, I'll talk a little bit more about what we do in Technology Crimes Division, what an OIG is, and that kind of thing. A lot of people have some misunderstandings about what the OIG is, and I want to talk about that very briefly. But mostly today, we just want to take your questions and try to help you understand how we work together and what happens when a school reports a data breach and how these different components get involved.
Thank you. So the whole purpose and the evolution of this was at last year's conference, we got a lot of feedback that we have a black hole. Here's my black hole. People didn't understand that when they reported something to us, what happened next. Okay, because we didn't have as good a communications as possible back and forth to make sure everyone understood what's going on. So I've renamed this my black hole brief. So real quick here's Federal Student Aid at a glance. Again, you'll see in here, if you went to the keynote this morning with General Brown, work with partners. That's key to what we do. Help protect that data. This last year, we responded to a 403% increase, since 2017. We've seen a 403% increase in school breach reporting. That does not mean it's increased. It means that you, the schools, are giving us feedback and reporting it. That's significant for us. It helps us understand your environment, understand some of the things you're faced with that other schools may also be faced with, and helps us work with you. So To me, that is a huge plus. I'd like to see that percentage to be thousands. Again, it's part of the agreements we have, et cetera. You need to do it. Just the fact that we're starting now to partnership and do it is fantastic. Go down to the lower left, expanding risk-based security practices. That's some of the continuous assessment for over 69 systems that we have that stores the data we share with you. Those are spread out across not only data centers directly hosted by federal student aid, but also third parties that hold the information that is presented by the students. So they're a wealth of information. We do in a separate accreditation process for all of those systems, and we use a very high standard when we do that accreditation. It's an industry or a NIST standard that we use. We are expanding some of our oversight in what we've declared as our high-value assets. It's a Homeland Security program. Those are like the richest targets. We have 8 of them in federal student aid. We've increased our security around those and are continuing to evolve that. On the upper right, increasing threat intelligence capabilities. We've expanded the post-secondary institution, PSI's post-secondary institution, security operations as a team underneath myself. 2 years ago, it was 0 people. Now I have a government person and 2.5 contractors, as you count contractors, directly supporting them. Well, a person's part-time on this, part-time on something else. That does not include other folks I have that will get involved in this. We have specifically a hunt team. We'll talk about, I might talk about another slide here, but the hunt team is not counted against my PSI because that's a normal part of business we've done. We've just expanded its scope to include schools now. Finally, enhanced security governance, best practice. Every time you report to us, something to us, and we talk to you, and we remediate it, or help you remediate it, or help you get through it, we create lessons learned that then become best practices. Things like multi-factor authentication, best practices coming out of things that have been seen at schools. Data loss prevention, another best practice. Network segmentation, which is basically taking the Title IV information, putting it off in its own little piece, and not sharing it across. A lot of schools have a very flat network, is what we refer to it as, where a student can get anywhere on that network they want to go. We're saying block it off into its own room. That way the student can't get to it unless they know how to get through the door. And then finally, implement standardized security requirements for all of the IT acquisitions we're doing. General talked about next gen as a whole this morning. The next gen platforms that we've acquired and are getting ready to deploy hopefully by the end of this month and into the next year as we add on more capabilities. We set a new security standard for those that we have never seen in FSA before. That was a set of requirements that was developed by the Department of CISO, Stephen Hernandez and myself 2 years ago, that significantly raised the cybersecurity requirements that every vendor has to meet as part of the acquisition stuff. And then finally in the middle, and I think you heard these numbers from the Secretary this morning, 42 million customers and 1.5 trillion in loan value. This is kind of how we partner with you. We do identify, that's provide guidance, assist you with that. The terms left, boom, and right you see on there, and unfortunately I didn't have the boom slide in here. We talk about the boom. Boom is when something happens. That's the actual compromise in the middle. Left of the boom is proactive things you can do. Normally going to be cheaper than right of the boom, which is recovering from that. Recovery from a compromise is expensive. You want to be to the left of the boom, and so we're trying to drive you to the left of the boom. So the top block there, identify and protect, talk about things that you can be looking at, implementing to keep you out of the boom situation. Boom's when you detect that incident, report it. We'll intake it. We'll do analysis of it, and by investigation we mean analysis being done at the cyber level, not necessarily criminal investigation activities at that point. That's a whole different group. That's where Special Agent Harper becomes involved. That is part of the whole boom. That's definitely an area he wants to take interest in and does every day and works very closely with us. Then finally, we talked about respond and recover. those are the things that are going to get you fixed and get you back onto a good path as you go down the future. This is kind of the breach process, so kind of keep this in mind as we go through our discussions later and your questions. We get the incident report at step 1. We process it. We talk to you. We classify it. We use a 0 through 4 classification. 0 being, thank you very much. It's not a Title IV issue. It's not an FSA issue. You may have issues in your state. 4 is, everyone's on board. It's major. Okay, so we have a scale for that. Then we collaborate with you guys. That's why giving us POC information is very important, so we can talk to the right people that understand the technical nuances of what's going on. We'll work with them, try to get you fixed, at least stop the bleed, and then we move on into, as you fix it, we'll provide you recommendations, help you get through your remediation discussions, understand what you're doing to fix the problem, and maybe that in the future becomes, as we go to step 4, the lessons learned part of this. Things we can share with other people that says, hey, if you do this, prevents that. Okay, or if this happens, do this, and it'll minimize your impact or lessen your impact. And then finally, we share those best practices with all the schools, and you would be then closing out your incident at step 5. Okay, now we're going to let Rob take, so again, I said this is a cooperative area. We work very closely with the Department of Security Operations, which is underneath Rob, and the IG, and they'll talk about what they do in relationship to a post-secondary institution breach activity. Rob?
We'll go into the next nice pretty eye chart here. So I live most of my day in an incident response mode. So this is kind of a day-to-day routine for me as we work through the many events that get reported to the Security Operations Center, from various means. So if you look at the top quadrant there, the detection and analysis, this is kind of where we start any incident activity. So whether it's reported via one of our tool suites that have been established, that have established thresholds that will report automatically if something meets that mark, or whether it's employee reported, self-reported, third-party reported. This is kind of where we go into our, just our data analysis. So the initial thing that we'll do from a department, whether it's someone from a third party, any of our borrowers, anybody who comes through FSA through any of the school breaches, we'll usually make a determination whether a suspicious event report needs to be filed for this. And this is really just to help us gather all the information that's needed for us to determine whether the actual event is an incident or not. Once we've confirmed that it is an incident, we just kind of flow through and we'll start looking for various indicators that could help us understand if this is a one-off situation or something that is reoccurring, depending on what type of incident we're talking about. As we move down into the purple area, the middle area, this is where we go into containment, eradication, and then recovery. So a lot of this is really just more so what it means to us is this a one-time situation? Is this an anomaly that we can easily plug, or is this an ongoing problem that we have to investigate much further, build essential indicators to see where else we could potentially be having this problem, and then interfacing with both FSA, SOC, and then our partners at OIG to really touch things that might be outside of our control. Like I said, I focus on the department's enterprise. So when things start to get into school-related activity, things that will influence with some of the data that go to our borrowers, I have to obviously work with Dan's team very heavily to get those POCs and get the information that we need. If it starts to look in any means criminal in nature, that is outside of the scope of the knowledge that I have on my team, and that's immediately when we'll contact OIG and get them involved as early in the process as we can. The green section at the bottom is kind of misleading. All those things above it don't have to happen before we already go into some of our communication. So from a reporting perspective, we have certain federal, guidelines that we have to meet. So I have 60 minutes from the moment I know an incident has occurred to report it based on the level of classification that it meets. So those will happen immediately. So we deal a lot with privacy information. So there's a lot of folks that will have to get involved because, again, my team focuses on, a lot of information system, data-related information around the enterprise. So I don't have privacy experts either. So anything that will go into the realm of privacy, we immediately pull in the department's privacy advocacy group and their privacy incident response personnel. But essentially all this is showing is that, again, in our post-incident analysis, we're really paying attention to the after actions, lessons learned, so that we can feed this back into, our day-to-day processes so that we can streamline and improve reportability and being able to, plug any gaps that we have to keep moving. So again, I report directly to the department's Chief Information Security Officer, and he has several initiatives that he drives. If you look at the left side of the chart here, strengthening through collaboration. We know that we're not the only smart people in the world. So we know that without collaboration, we are probably missing key marks that we could easily implement throughout our enterprise. So in coordination between both the department's Chief Information Security Officer and then Dan Commons as the Federal Student Aid Chief Information Security Officer, they also meet regularly at both of the federal councils, both at the CIO and the CISO level, as well as working with various industry partners to figure out changes in marks that could potentially be or attack vectors that could be used against the department as well. So we're definitely not trying to only look at this from a single department approach. We're trying to work with multiple industries and multiple groups to figure out what are practices, what are processes that other organizations put in place to help us grow our own program and be more efficient. The right side of the chart where we're enhancing through our investments. So you've probably seen this in various industries. Everything comes back to, for us, people, technology, and processes. And no one of those is probably any more important than the other. We need to make sure that we have not only the right people, but they have to be trained on the technologies that we have. If I go out and just buy big name technologies and throw them in there, but no one knows how to use them, then they're probably not giving me any information that is usable or actionable. Same thing with processes. We don't typically look to procure new products for our enterprise unless we have some form of process that it's used to enable. So, buying technology without an understanding of what processes you're using it for is just not sound investment practices.
Again, my name's Tom Harper, and I want to talk a little bit about the OIG and the relationship here. And this is kind of an important distinction for a lot of people to understand. The OIG, every federal agency, every large federal agency in the federal government has an OIG that is appointed by Congress. With respect to the Department of Education, when the legislation was crafted to form the Department of Education back in the 70s, there was a section in there that talked about an OIG being formed in accordance with the Inspector General's Act of 1974. The Inspector General's Act specifically says that the OIG is an independent agency. For the purposes of appropriation and in some operations, we're considered an independent component. But basically, we kind of do our own thing. In many respects, you could say we're not part of the department, but we kind of are. We're an independent component. So it's important to make that distinction, because when you as a PSI start interfacing with the folks at this table or our representatives, you have to understand the difference in our mission. Dan and Robert are more concerned with the compliance and helping you get back on your feet after an incident, after the boom, as Dan talks about. My group, the OIG, we're more concerned with catching the bad guys. If there was an actual breach where data was stolen or a computer intrusion where somebody broke in and committed an unauthorized access to the department's data, that's where we get involved. That's a criminal investigation. Myself and the folks that work for me, are all sworn federal law enforcement officers. We pretty much have the same authority with a few minor caveats as a special deputy U.S. Marshal. So we can make arrests, serve search warrants, serve subpoenas. We can do all that stuff. We go after the bad guys. That being said, whenever there's a data breach, we don't consider the school to be the bad guys, okay? We're not really concerned with the compliance piece. And it's important to understand there's data breaches that deal with unauthorized disclosure, which is more along the FERPA stuff, and there's data breaches that deal with unauthorized access, which is more of the criminal investigation and the violation of 18 U.S.C. 1030. So I want to draw that bright line up front so that you guys understand what we're talking about as we progress through this. We're created by Congress. Our IG, Sandra Bruce, reports to the Secretary and to Congress. We do a semi-annual report to Congress, which we just did. We just released our most recent one in the last couple of weeks. The IG is appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. Our mission is to audit and investigate them. We make sure that they're doing their job. And we also investigate criminal behavior that prevents them from doing their job, okay? We are here to protect the American taxpayer and promote integrity and efficiency in the operation of the department. That's what we do. So what do we do in Technology Crimes Division, the group that I manage? We investigate crimes and criminal cyber threats against the department's infrastructure and any criminal activity in cyberspace that threatens the department's administration of federal education funds. Our investigative jurisdiction is over any IT system that's used in the administration of federal money originating from the Department of Education. As a very broad and generic example of that, if a PSI's financial aid department routinely uses the email system of that PSI to transmit and administer financial aid, that email system would technically fall under our investigative jurisdiction if there is a hack of that email system, and we see that a lot with the phishing cases. Give you some case examples. Grade hacking, computer intrusion. We've investigated folks selling malware, like Dan talked about in the previous section, the ransomware that's for sale on the dark web that's used to lock up the systems at PSIs. We investigate those guys for selling that malware. We work a lot with the FBI's Cyber Task Force. We are embedded with the FBI Cyber Task Force in the FBI's Washington Field office. In fact, if myself or one of the agents that work for me were to call you out of the blue and you would say, I don't know who you are, how do I verify you are who you say you are, we could tell you to call the FBI, and the FBI would vet and let you know that we are who we say we are because we're part of that task force. Business email compromises, misuse of department systems, falsifying FAFSAs, and we've also unfortunately had to get into child exploitation material and trafficking.
All right, so the idea was just to talk about that black hole a little bit and give you an idea that while you may not see it, there's a lot of activities that are happening within the department every time you tell us something. We are working harder within our side of the house, Rob and myself, to make sure we have better communication. You know, some of you recently, that if you've had to report one recently, you're seeing email coming back to you saying, thank you for reporting, we're investigating it, we're doing analysis, and by the way, we'll probably get a hold of your IT POC that you gave us. So we're trying to be more responsive and make sure that we have more open communications with you. Earlier someone talked about, well, you know, is your approach that you're going to fine us? My approach is we're going to help you. You know, I'm not concerned with bringing the hammer down on top of you as much as I am concerned with Let's stop the activity that's going on, then let's fix it and figure out how we can prevent it in the future. If that activity spawns something else, like something the IG would be interested in, yeah, they're going to go down their path. They're going to take that independent approach and say, nah, this is in our area. Anything that goes into the IG area, I won't be able to talk to you about, because most times they don't talk to me about it. But the idea is that we're still going to continue to help you triage the problem, fix the problem. It may spin off other things that are happening around us as well. So that's something to keep in mind, that sometimes when you ask us questions into that black hole, our answer is we don't know what's going on yet, or we can't give you any more advice on that. Because sometimes it goes in those investigative areas that we just don't have insight into.
Hey, Dan, can I comment on that?
Sure.
So let me just address that real quick. So a lot of times when we open a criminal investigation, if we have a United States attorney on board, and a grand jury has been convened, that grand jury rule locks down the information that's developed as a result of grand jury subpoenas. So you may report a data breach to the department, and the department may look at it and say, oh, wow, there's criminal activity here. We need to get the OIG involved. We get involved. We go to a U.S. attorney's office and start an investigation there, and the U.S. attorney takes it for prosecution. They convene a grand jury, and now we're starting to gather investigative information for our investigation through that grand jury process. Well, all of that stuff is locked down and protected by grand jury secrecy rules. We cannot give that back to the department. And so when you call the department and ask them about something and they say, well, the OIG's got it, we can't tell you, or we don't know, that's why. It's because we have certain legal requirements that protect our constitutional rights that prevent us from disclosing it back to the department.
Thank you for the clarification. So at this time, you got an idea of what we're doing. It's really not a black hole behind there, although I do like the concept of the black hole concept. But we are trying to do things to help you. And while our communication may not be as good as it should be, there are a lot of things that go on at Rob and my level to understand what's happening to you, to try to help you. And then if there are other legal things, and there are even some things that we'll say, hey, to the IG, are you interested in this? And they may go, no, it doesn't meet the threshold where we need to be involved. And that happens a lot. I mentioned our categorization in the previous briefing, where we categorize things 0 through 4 based on volume of both PII as well as dollars. It may be one of those category zeros or a low category 1 that cat 0 is, thank you very much. From our perspective, it's not Title IV. You make sure you do your state requirements and those type of things. Level 1 is, yeah, we're going to talk to you a little bit more probably. Obviously, level 4 then becomes the extreme. We're going to talk to you a lot. And that's our approach we've been trying to implement over the last 2 years. Rob is in the middle of all that to make sure that there are additional reporting we may be required to do. That's on Rob's team, like to the U.S. CERT, for example. So he's taking care of that piece of it. But as a team across the table here, we are working the issue. It doesn't really go into a black hole. It may feel like it from your perspective. I encourage you, if it feels like it's in a black hole from your perspective, ping us. You know, we've got the FSA Cyber School email address. Send something to that and say, black hole. Okay, my team, the black hole is kind of resonating. They help me put the slides together. So, yeah, we want to communicate as much as we possibly can. There are some limitations that we cannot talk to you about, but in general, we want to work with you. This is not a bring the hammer out, as you might have seen folks have been around for a few years, might have seen in the past, where we immediately go to, well, we're going to yank you Title IV funds. No, I don't want to get to that point. I don't think federal student aid leadership wants to get to that point. We want to start working it early so we don't reach that point. So at this point, we're open for questions. We got a pretty good period of time here to talk to you, and we're more than happy to answer questions. Do I have? There's one. Thank you.
Is that on?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Can you help us by defining what a breach is and also how much time a school has to report it? Is there a level of, well, do we need to validate this? Should we be talking internally? Do we need to let the president know? I know a lot of that goes on between the time somebody thinks there's a problem and the time that they think, well, maybe this is reportable. You know, that 0 through 4
Yes.
scale that you have? I have a feeling that some schools also have that 0 through 4 as to, you know, making a determination as to what a breach actually is or a reportable breach. So can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure.
Thank you.
We as a department use the OMB definition of breach. Unfortunately, I didn't have it in the slide deck. If you look at briefing number 25, which was the earlier presentation I did, it has the OMB definition in there. What we're really looking for is, has something improper happened to that data or the financial information, PII information? If it has, let us know. I will take, as I've said consistently for the last 3 years, I'll take any report you want to give me. Okay, I'll be more than happy to look at it, put my team onto it. It may come down to, thank you for reporting, but you know, follow your school and state requirements because it doesn't meet our requirements and our thresholds for federal look at what you're doing. So that's where our categorization scale comes into place. I know for a fact that a lot of schools have a process in place where they do a lot of steps before it ever hits a let Department of Education know. You know, I'd love to review those processes, talk about them, at what appropriate point the department should know. There is, as someone pointed out, she may not be in the room now, but someone pointed out in the last briefing, there's a PPA item that has a time and a dollar value associated with it. I pay attention more to, are you talking to us? Are you reporting it? I've had schools call me up, send us notes, months and months and months after something happened. We're still going to help you with it. We're still going to process it. We're going to still ask you questions. We're going to try to communicate it. I haven't found a single person for that yet, and I don't believe I have any intention to. But the sooner you let us know, the sooner we can help. And sometimes we have access to resources you do not. We have federal resources, as we used to do when I was in the Air Force, behind the green door, which means it's a highly classified environment. We can leverage resources from Homeland Security and intelligence community if we see something that is in that realm. Or we may already have looked at it for another school. We may be able to provide you with advice. So I highly encourage you to report it early as you're running through your process. The most that will happen is we ask you a few more questions. Have you done A, B, C, and D? And if you have, fantastic. If you haven't, maybe you need to go do these or consider them. So one of the things we're looking at this year is revamping the PPA, some of the cyber areas of the PPA. That's one of the areas we're looking at. We highly encourage you to report it as quickly as possible. The department, for example, as a federal agency, has a 1-hour time frame that we're supposed to report reportable events. And again, we go through a criteria. If it's a reportable event, we need to report it. Sometimes we don't even know it's a reportable event because we haven't done the analysis or finished the analysis to the point where we understand it. But as soon as we understand it is, then the clock kicks in and we have to go respond to it. And that's where Rob's team lives every day on making those decisions for the department as a whole. So that's kind of where we're at.
Can I jump on that?
Sure, absolutely.
So with regard to reporting timeliness, again, this kind of goes to the wall that's involved between the criminal investigation and the compliance piece. We have criminal investigations ongoing that they don't know anything about. And if you as a PSI experience a breach, and in particular a breach where account credentials are compromised, whether it's an email account, whether it's an access to financial aid data, if you find that someone fell for a phishing attack and the bad guys got into the account and set up an auto forwarding rule or an auto deleting rule or something like that, we, the OIG, would like to know about that as soon as practically possible. And here's why. Because, and there's a classic example of this right now. We currently have an investigation going on. Dan talked about this situation we have where the bad guys are compromising accounts, getting in, changing direct deposit information so that the refund goes to the bad guys instead of students. So we've got an investigation going on with regard to that at a particular school. Just this week, we had a school report, oh, we had 15 accounts get compromised and the direct deposit information was changed, but no money went out the door, so we didn't think it was that big of a deal. This happened 6 months ago. Well, my investigation's been going on for 9 months. If I had known that that breach occurred when it occurred, I could have reached out to that school and talked to them and said, hey, give me logs from your email system, show me the IP addresses, show me the artifacts that you have from that breach, and let me compare it to my ongoing investigation. This could be yet another school that was victimized by the same group of bad actors. From a criminal intelligence perspective, we want you to report it as soon as possible. So if you send an email to that, what is it, CPS?
FSA Cyber?
Yeah, FSA Cyber or the...
School Cyber.
Yeah. We're on a distribution list. So when an email comes into that mailbox, it shotguns out and it goes to Rob's team, it goes to Dan's team, and it comes to my team. And we see it all pretty much at the same time. And if it's reported, I and my group can look at it and say, hey, this pertains to an ongoing investigation. We need to call this school and let them know and talk to them and get more information. So in some cases, you may get a call from Ed OIG before you get a call from the department, an FSA, because we'll want to get that information for our ongoing investigation. This scenario has played out multiple times in that particular direct deposit investigation, to the point that we started with one school and now we're up to, I think, about 30 schools that were all targeted by the same group of bad actors using the same methodologies. So that's why we ask you to be as timely as possible in the reporting.
So not only is the email goes directly to everybody, but the case management tool that we use in the department is a single tool that we all use and have access to. So if we're gathering stuff from a cybersecurity perspective, it goes in that tool, the IG can have access to it. So if something in the future comes up similar to that, they can come back and look at the old cases to see what we gathered at that point, like logs, for example. So that will help us quite a bit. Next question.
One of the things you mentioned in the previous session was cybersecurity insurance. And so as part of this whole reporting a breach process and the process and investigating all of this, do you work together with an insurance company that is with the school, or is it entirely just with the school? And are the findings like shared? And I just want to understand a little bit more about that process.
So we do not typically work with insurance companies directly in this space. I do know that we've had a lot of discussion with some schools where they brought in a forensics expert, for example, to help them solve the problem. Well, we've talked with that forensic expert and talked through what they were finding. But we typically don't deal directly with insurance companies, et cetera. The example I gave you was the city of Baltimore. And that city did go out and purchase cyber insurance in case something happened to them in the future. But from a school perspective, we haven't dealt with that.
Just one follow-up. There was, I read some articles in the past year that hackers were targeting institutions that had insurance, knowing that there was coverage and there were payouts and things like that. Are you able to shed any more light on that, or what a school should be looking at if we are looking at those things?
I don't have any specific information.
I haven't seen anything regarding targeting of schools that have cyber insurance. However, it does kind of bring up a somewhat tangential subject that I wanted to touch on in this session, and that is breach attorneys or cyber breach attorneys, having legal representation from a law firm that specializes in representing institutions or agencies or businesses that have been victimized by a cyber breach or a data breach. So the SAG and the PPA are fairly clear about the PSI's obligation to cooperate with the department and FSA and the OIG with regard to investigations into data breaches. That breach attorney, if a PSI hires a breach attorney, that breach attorney does not have standing to intervene in that regulatory requirement. The PSI is still required to talk directly to the department, FSA, and the OIG. That breach attorney, and there's a couple of firms out there who've kind of taken an adverse position to this. That breach attorney does not have the right to say, hey, Ed and OIG, you cannot talk to anybody at the school. You have to talk to us. They can't do that. Because the PPA and the SAG agreement are pretty clear about that. And I would imagine that the same thing would apply with regard to cyber insurance as well. But we've had to butt heads a couple of times with breach attorneys who feel like that it's their responsibility to protect the school. And what they don't understand, and this is why I wanted to bring this up, is when the school takes on, or the PSI takes on this cyber breach representation, they make clear to the attorney or the firm that's representing them, hey, we have a regulatory requirement to talk to the department and to OIG about any data breaches that may occur. So please don't get in the way of that communication. That's something that needs to happen up front in the discussions with the breach attorney. You also may run into a situation, and I don't want to keep you standing up if you want to sit down, but you also may run into a situation where you have a breach, a data breach, and another law enforcement agency gets involved, and they either get a state or local prosecutor or even a federal prosecutor involved, and that prosecutor will convene a grand jury and seek a court order to gag or non-disclosure on the school. And we've had schools come to us and say, we understand you're conducting a federal criminal investigation and it's a law enforcement matter, but we've been told by a federal U.S. attorney that we can't talk to you, which makes no sense at all because we're federal law enforcement just like that U.S. attorney's office is. The PSI can't hide behind that. So if there's a breach at a PSI and that PSI contacts another law enforcement agency, such as the FBI, the Secret Service, or something like that, that's fine. We don't have a problem with that as long as you meet the reporting requirements that are in the PPA and the SAG agreement, that's fine. However, please let that other law enforcement agency know that this does fall under the investigative purview of OIG and that they need to coordinate with us in their investigation. If you're going to talk to them, please let them know. If you talk to your campus police department, please let them know that we'll probably be calling them to find out and work the investigation with them jointly. We're not trying to steal anybody's thunder or take away anybody's candy. We want to help, just like Dan said. We've got resources sometimes that a campus police department does not have. And so we just need to understand up front, and the PSIs need to understand, that there is a regulatory requirement to cooperate and talk to the department. And if you do receive a non-disclosure order or something like that from a U.S. Attorney's Office or from a state prosecutor or a local prosecutor, please have your counsel go back and talk to them and say, understand that we have a regulatory requirement to talk to the department. And if that needs to be addressed with the court that issued the order, then it needs to be addressed. Answer your question? Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Sir?
First, thank you guys for providing the overview. It's extremely helpful. Kind of gave us the and so that was very, very informative. Rob, actually a question for you, and kind of a visionary question. So as you are managing, I think you said the SOC for the Department of Education, where do you envision that the PSIs would either get to a place where maybe we're real-time feeding information into your SOC, or just kind of a visionary where you kind of want us to get to?
So that's a
You want me to take that one,
very
Rob?
big question, and Dan probably would be the better person to answer when it comes to PSI. More so because we deal more with the ed enterprise, and I wouldn't say that it's not on the department CISO's or his view for the future, but it's not, there are probably certain regulations or certain processes that would have to be put in place before we can get to a point that we could take live data from somebody or help assist in kind of an oversight perspective of any of the security tools that you would have in any of your institutions.
So some of the discussions we're having with, and in the last briefing I talked about, over the last year we've had a lot of meetings with a lot of the organizations that represent schools in different ways, EDUCAUSE and ACE, are two of the big players, on getting feedback from them on what they think are the issues, what they think might be a what if, a possibility. We're taking all that under advisement. We are looking at potential ways to recraft the PPA to add additional cybersecurity requirements. And part of one of the tasks strategically that was given to me by General Brown early on when he came on board was, give me a what if and design the capability if we decide to do this at some point in the future on how we would deal with data directly from schools. Right now, in a lot of schools, when we ask them as a result of a breach, we say, send us your audit files, send us your scan results, whatever the case may be. We bring those in and we dump them into tools anyway. So it's a manual, you got to ship it to me. I got to then unpack it if it's zipped, and then load it into the tool anyway. So we haven't ruled any of that type of stuff out. It's a lot of what if. Getting back to the incident response piece of it, the post-secondary institution team is an integral part of the FSA SOC. So they are underneath the SOC purview. That team is actually assigned to my senior cybersecurity operations chief. And everything we do is ruled and governed by incident processes. We've added additional ones specific to school. We've tailored some specific to schools because the environment's a little bit different. But they are part of our SOC. All the stuff they're working on, I mentioned at one point I can leverage other teams, like my hunt team. If they see a problem over here, they can throw it over to the hunt team and say, go find out more information about this. Okay, and the hunt team will come back with the information that they found. So while we talk about that team is a component of a much larger team. That whole team can be leveraged to do whatever we need to do to assist. And that's department-wide. So we can reach out to the EdSOC for expertise that they have as well. And then sometimes we'll ask what-if questions to the IG. Got smart guys over there. They have access to things we don't. Tom's mentioned several of them already. So we may not get a distinct answer of, but it may be something like when he just talked about the school breaches, the financial information that we've been seeing changed, where we pulled a thread, someone reported, we started pulling that thread, pulled it from the legal side, pulled it from his investigative side. Now it's gone from the one school to, I believe you said 30 schools, plus or minus. That's the type of stuff that we want to be able to do is again, not a black hole. We talk to each other. We work with each other very closely. There are some things that we just won't know about because it's over in the legal side. But it doesn't stop us from asking him questions, and we do that quite a bit because he's got some very, very skilled people on his team that may be able to help us with a technical answer that we just weren't quite seeing from our side. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for attending. You guys have a good day. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your assistance. Performance.